recent primary in Michigan and all the attention given to the tragedy in Flint, Michigan, there is an aspect of that situation there in Flint that people are not fully aware of, which is the geographic location, the concentrations of poorer people in tight geographic locations. And here to talk about that with us now and shed some light on that subject is Tracey Ross. Tracey is the Associate Director of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. In that role, she focuses on place-based responses to fighting poverty. She began her career working for U.S. Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton and has also worked for Senator Ken Salazar on energy and environment issues. So it's a good background to talk to us about this problem from. Tracey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me and for focusing on this issue.
Well, I think it's so important. I think that, one of the things that people don't realize, and I spent a lot of time in Flint about 20 years ago, so I know the city a little bit, but it's a changing situation both for Flint specifically and for lower income communities in general. But one of the points you made in a recent article that you co-authored with Danielle Solomon is that many of the lower income communities' problems stem from or are exacerbated by the concentration of people of lower income. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I think that first, if we talk about Flint specifically, more than 40% of the residents there now live below the poverty level, and 56% of them are African American. And what we see is this isn't entirely surprising. As horrifying as the situation is that low-income communities and communities of color tend to live near the most hazardous places in our country. So Superfund sites, near oil refineries, near landfills. And a lot of this has to do with the legacy of our housing policy. So, land use policies originated to ensure that people were being separated from these sorts of industrial uses, but what this really translated to in practice is making sure that white households were protected from these sorts of disasters, these hazards. And so this is something that is a long legacy in our country. And I do make the point of pointing out the racial aspect, because the average African-American family making $100,000 a year lives in a more disadvantaged community than the average white family making $30,000 a year. So it's not always just a class issue, but there's this racial dynamic as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important for people to realize that people are being and maybe at some point we'll actually go into a deeper discussion even than that, but the fact that in 50 years of discussion as a nation about how to end housing segregation, we have made what I would argue is relatively little progress, meaning that communities of color are more susceptible, I would argue, to these types of environmental tragedies. I don't know if you agree with that or not. But
absolutely. African American families still are shown fewer rental apartments or houses, or if they're even looking to buy, they're shown fewer houses. So the legacy of discrimination continues, but also there are pervasive forms of discrimination. And this is, of course, not to suggest that the many white families who are hurt in areas like Flint and other communities are not feeling the brunt of these environmental hazards. But what's often the case is that we've seen throughout our country, we've had more than 2 centuries of policies that have used race as a way to divide people and to inflict harm on low-income whites. Low-income whites have been caught in the crosshairs of a lot of racism. You saw it with welfare reform and the fact that African-American women were the poster children of welfare, which is a program that disproportionately helps white people. So all of this is to say that white people in this country and who are experiencing the kinds of problems that we see in Flint not only have to see economic justice, but racial justice would impact them as well.
Well said. And Tracey Ross, I'd like to pivot now a little bit, if we can, and talk about something else you guys have been working on at talkpoverty.org. You had a launch there recently with, I believe, Senator Elizabeth Warren participated on why seniors, rather than CEOs, deserve a raise. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece. It's on our newly designed website at talkpoverty.org. And the piece, it's a quick read, but it says so much. So she outlines just how important Social Security is and how it's our largest anti-poverty program. It recently kept 21 million Americans out of poverty. And this program was often the target of cuts or privatization by Republicans. But the truth of the matter is it's a hugely important program for seniors and veterans. But unfortunately, usually the people receiving Social Security get a boost in their payments to respond to the cost of living adjustments, but that's not happening. And so what her legislation, which she writes about, would do is ensure that people receiving benefits, seniors and veterans who are receiving these benefits, would get a 3.9% increase in their benefits, a one-time increase. And the reason, the beautiful thing about the 3.9% increase is because it's equivalent to what the top CEOs' pay increase is. So it's not only is it saying that we need to give more money to seniors and veterans who depend greatly on Social Security, but it's saying, well, let's have a conversation of our values in this country by having that equivalent percentage of what the CEOs' raises look like.
Well, one of the things that frustrates me and frankly makes me a little angry in this whole topic, and I'm sure it's more than crossed your minds over at talkpoverty.org, is the fact that a lot of the same CEOs who in effect awarded themselves through their boards of directors a 3.9 pay increase are perfectly content to see seniors and veterans and disabled people and others get nothing this year. And in fact, many of them have been part of that organization, Fix the Debt, that was working to see that they get even less, that going forward a lower calculation is used for these cost of living increases. So I think you put it exactly right, Tracey Ross, when you say that it's an issue of our values as a nation, what we value, whether we really want to treat seniors right in the sunset of life, whether we really want to treat needier folks right if they are in need because of disability, if we really want to treat young people on Social Security right. So I think the symbolism of using the CEO's own raise to make up for this lack of a cost of living adjustment for Social Security is a great one. Senator Warren got a lot of co-sponsors for this, and she also got a position of honor on your Talk Poverty website.
The honor was all ours to be able to host her op-ed, and I'm glad that you pointed out that many CEOs have actually been, I think, on the wrong side of this issue, which makes it all the more important. And this 3.9% increase in their benefits, it only amounts to about $50 a month. So this isn't some exorbitant bill, but at the same time, that money makes a huge difference. So it's over a year. It's about $581. It could equal up to 3 months of groceries. You could have a year's worth of out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs covered. There are a lot of things that are life-saving that just a modest increase in this funding would do. So it's a fantastic piece of legislation. The piece that Elizabeth Warren wrote on our website right now, it lays out the problem and the solution beautifully. So we were just lucky to have her place her op-ed with us.
Well, and I also want to get listeners to aware of the fact that I think you've redesigned talkpoverty.org recently. It looks great. There are a lot of really, and I'm saying this sincerely, I'm not just giving you guys a plug, Tracey Ross.
I appreciate it.
Well, it is a plug, but it's a sincere plug. It looks good. It's got a lot of really interesting stuff on it, a lot of very interesting articles. I don't know if you have other plans for changing it going forward, but right now it looks quite good. And we should also mention to people that you have
done, I think, is, for the foreseeable future, it's going to make it a much easier process for people to navigate. You can easily access the podcasts that we've been doing. We're going to have a lot of good high profile contributors like Senator Sherrod Brown. We're also going to have a number of people continue to share their own stories of experiences with poverty. So it'll be a lot of the same important things that we've been sharing, but with an easier experience. And I think one of the improvements is that we have a poverty data section, and people can look at how their states are faring compared to other states. There's a interactive map. You can also look at congressional districts and break out data by race. So it's a much easier user experience, and we're really hopeful that this site will continue to be an important resource for advocates and journalists alike. We see this as something that can be a great place for people to even enhance their own work, because some reporters have contacted us and been able to highlight the stories of people that we've featured in their own work. So it's a great place for anyone interested in the anti-poverty movement.
And you also have, I will add, Talk Poverty Radio, which is a pleasure to listen to, also on We Act Radio, as we are right here on the Zero Hour. And, I wanted to, in closing, I guess, Tracey Ross, just talk to you a little bit about the fact that we're hearing a little bit more about poverty this year in the political process, but I've been thinking about poverty a lot this week because I've been researching longevity and the growing gap in life expectancy between the richest and poorest among us. So I'm troubled by the rise in poverty we've experienced in recent years. I'm troubled by the loss of human life that arises from it, years of life. And I'm still, just in closing, I guess your thoughts on this, I'm still a little troubled that, you talk to politicians sometimes, even good, Democratic politicians, they'll say, well, it just doesn't poll that well. But it seems to me that as a moral issue, as an ethical issue, we should be talking more as a nation about poverty.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why people think it doesn't poll well is because poverty is often discussed as something that is happens to other people, that it's those people over there. We know that about 15% of the population is living in poverty, but we talk about it as if it's the same people every single year, when really, 4 out of 5 Americans will experience at least a year of economic hardship in their lifetime. So poverty is a common experience. It's not necessarily an identity. So I think we have to talk about it in those terms. It's a failing of the economy. It's not the failing of individuals. And I think when we broaden it out in that way, it resonates with people. And, I think that maybe politicians are polling incorrectly. They're asking the wrong questions of people, because this is just a common experience. And I hope that more attention is paid to it throughout the rest of the campaigns.
Well, I certainly hope so, too. And I guess, you make a great point. Everybody thinks they're going to be rich, and they're probably not. Nobody thinks they're going to be poor, and they just might be. So we're not talking about the other. We're talking about ourselves. So listen, Tracey Ross, thanks so much for all the great work you do at talkpoverty.org. And thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.